Since you're watching this, it means that my spirit has finally decided to leave my tired, diseased body and go home. I've known I was dying since June of 2019, so I've had a long time to think about it. And my days have begun and ended with gratitude, and my life started with family. And I decided that I should be the one to tell you what was important to me during my lifetime. My family started when my grandparents came from Finland. My mother's parents, Swan and Maria, immigrated from Helsinki. Marie was a waitress in Superior, Wisconsin, when she met Swan, who worked in the shipyards. After he married Marie, they had 5 daughters. My mother, Gladys, was the middle daughter. My father's family came from Norway, and Henry Alverson came first with his brother and built a home on 42nd and Nokomis in Minneapolis, which still is there today. After the home was built, Paula joined him, and they had 8 children. My father was the second youngest, and the first one to get his high school diploma. The rest of his brothers and sisters had to quit working during the Depression to save the Halverson household. My mother and father got married on May 4th, 1946. I was born November 4th, 1946. My early arrival was not a problem for the Kangases, but the Halversons were quite embarrassed. And as my Aunt Jeannie said, they were afraid to show their faces for months. My mom and dad didn't have enough money to live on their own, so they moved into the Halverson homestead. At that time, Aunt Pearl, Aunt Jeannie, and Uncle Roy were still living there. To bring a baby into that house was quite a change. Eventually, I grew up having multiple parents, and I spent several years in that house. I learned to walk and play and read while I lived there. My mom and dad moved around a lot, and eventually they moved where my grandma and grandpa Kingus and Aunt Barbara lived on 36th and Emerson. And my mom and dad and I lived in the basement apartment there. That's where I went to kindergarten. And I took the bus to the Minneapolis bus to school. And the first few times I took it, I forgot to get off and rode to the end of the line. So from that time on, the bus driver had me sit in the front seat so he could tell me when to get off. The Halversons got together twice a year. It would go in July to a farm in northern Minnesota and have a family picnic. And on Christmas Eve, we would gather at Hank's house and have dinner in the basement with all of us together. The Kangases gathered more often because my mother, my Aunt Barbara, and my Aunt Norma all worked for my Aunt June and saw each other daily. So we got together frequently for birthdays and other celebrations. And Christmas Day we spent with the Kangases and always ended downstairs singing carols while June played the piano. Growing up with cousins was a lot of fun. And when I was in 5th grade, I was left alone at Elk Lake, where June and Al were building a cabin. And the adults went home and worked, came back on Wednesday to check on us, and then back on Friday. Well, I watched the kids. One time, my cousin Michael was playing with his BB gun and had his hand on top of the rifle and shot it and got BBs in his hand. Well, I didn't have a driver's license. I didn't have a telephone, so I put all the kids in the boat, and away we went to the pavilion to call the adults to come and solve our problem. My sister Nancy was born in September of 1951. My sister Patricia was born in May of 1957. We were the 3 Halverson girls. We sisters weren't really close when we were young because we were so far apart in age. But once we were adults, we became close and had many sister lunches to talk about what was going on in our lives. In fact, my sister Nancy moved in and took care of me several times when I had MS episodes. And she babysat Rob when my work interfered with childcare. She also has been there for me every month during the last several years of my life. I appreciate her help immensely. One thing I learned from my mother is loyalty. Her sisters were a prime example of one for all and all for one. My father taught me about having a work ethic. He started at Honeywell when he was 17 and retired when he was 65. He always said, if a job is worth doing, it's worth doing well. And whenever Honeywell needed him, he was there 7 days a week. My mother died in May of 1974. She was only 47 years old. My sister Pat was a senior in high school. It became my responsibility to then have the family gatherings. So everyone came to my house for Christmas, and they still do. Christmas has always been a huge thing in my family, and I decorate for days, and I mean days. I start decorating in October, so I'm ready for Christmas in December. I hang over 50 wreaths, have over 300 Santas, and I don't know how many angels and other decorations. And I love getting ready for Christmas. So, all of my family, I dare you to have a celebrate a Christmas without thinking of me. As I grew up, I graduated from St. Louis Park High School in 1964. I graduated in a wheelchair because I got sick on the Ides of March 1964 and wound up in the hospital and stayed there until the day before graduation. My college scholarship was taken away, so I wasn't able to go to college unless I paid for it completely myself and was physically able to attend. I started at the University of Minnesota and went fall quarter and did fine, but come winter quarter, I was sick and I was unable to climb the stairs. And believe me, the University of Minnesota was not handicap accessible in 1965. I met Bob Walstead, and we got married on September 10th, 1966. Bob was in the military, and he went to school and finished school while I worked at the post office. We lived in an apartment in the basement on Blaisdell Avenue. And when he got back from basic training, we were able to afford our first house. And it was on 42nd and Colfax, right next to Barton School, and very close to Lake Harriet, which proved to be useful in the future. Well, eventually, Bob and I got pregnant. And my due date was January 10th, 1972. And on February 17th, Rob was born, and my first miracle occurred. I knew I wanted to be a parent, and I expected to love my child. But the first time I saw my baby and they put him on my chest, I felt unconditional love for the first time. The, the operating room filled with beautiful light, and I felt like the air changed. My life changed forever because I now knew what love is. Well, Rob and I became best friends, and I love taking care of him. I was able to spend my first 3 months alone with him. And when I went back to work, he got a babysitter who came to our house. Her name was Maggie, and she was an elderly lady who never stopped talking. And so Rob learned to talk very early. And I took him for his 18-month exam. And Dr. Green, who was his doctor, came in the office, and Rob was reading the blocks that were on the walls. And Dr. Green said, "Okay, Robbie, let me listen to your ticker." And Robbie looked at him and said, "That's not my ticker, it's my heart." And Dr. Green left the office and went outside and looked. I could hear him looking in his files. And he came back in and he said, "I'm sorry, I've never done this before, but I want to make sure I have the right patient. Is this Robert Walstead?" And I said, "Yes, it is." "And is he 18 months old?" And I said, "Yes, he is." And he said, "And does he read and talk like that all the time?" I said, "He talks all the time, and he still does." But Rob has been the joy of my life, and proud of him and the man he's become. And he gave me so much joy in my life. It was a true miracle. And we had so many adventures, so many trips, so much fun that he made my life. So in 1975, Bob and I got divorced, and Rob and I moved out to Burnsville. He went to daycare in the same building that we live, and we had a good old time. Eventually, I started dating again and met Greg. Neither Greg or I ever planned on getting married again. He was very different. At that time, I was an executive at Blue Cross, and Greg had shoulder-length red hair, as did I. He wore an earring and was a truck driver. Everybody said it would never last. But Greg was very different than any man I had ever met. He has more integrity than any person I've ever known. And when he asked me to marry him, he said he knew that I didn't really need him to support me or take care of me. But he said the one thing he would do is he would provide me a safe harbor for as long as we were together. And he has. Not only has he provided me a safe harbor, he's provided me a beautiful harbor and planted flowers and lovely gardens wherever we lived. And he's taken care of me. He has become my caregiver. He's bandaged whenever needed bandaging. He stuffed a hole in my chest where it was terribly infected, and he would stuff gauze in it twice a day. It was stinky and ugly. He lifted me from the wheelchair back and forth wherever I had to go. He's been in the waiting room waiting for every surgery I've ever had. And now during cancer, he's cooked all my meals, bandaged all my bandages, got me to all my doctor's appointments, and taken care of me. And I live in a beautiful, beautiful spot of land on Lake Superior that has flowers blooming all the time, except, of course, in winter. So once I married Greg, we had a combined family. My sister Nancy married Clyde, and they had two kids, Adam and Russell. Adam married Dana, and they had two kids, Lena and June. My sister Patricia married John. John had two kids, Lizzie and Aaron. And Lizzie married Brent and had Rowan. So our family became big, and our Christmas celebrations got even bigger. Well, Rob was growing up. He moved away. And when I saw that pickup truck leave our house on Sunnyside, I thought my heart would break. But he called weekly and kept in touch. He moved to Florida and then to California and then eventually back home. And when he came home, he started dating Kirsten, one of his high school friends. And he and Kirsten got married in May of 2001. They got married on the shore of our house in Lake Superior, and Greg had planted over 10,000 bulbs to bloom, and it was a miracle. They were all blooming. It was just beautiful. And the kids had their ceremony on the shore, and it was a beautiful sunny day. And I'll tell you, in May, up on Lake Superior, it could be snowing. So a good time was had by all. Then my second miracle occurred. Connor was born in November of 2003. I knew I was going to love having a grandchild, but no one prepared me to feel the same kind of unconditional love that I felt for Rob, for Connor. The first time I held that baby, I knew that I would love him till the day I died, and I do. And in February of 2005, the third miracle occurred, and we had Freya Beth. Freya came early. She was supposed to be born 3 months later, and she was a preemie, and we were all scared. But I tell you, the very first time I was able to hold Drea in the NICU, the nurse put her in my arms with all the wires and everything that were attached. And it was like holding a ball of sun. I felt so much energy from that little tiny baby. I knew that she was going to be fine. And she is. She's a competitive swimmer and smart as a whip. I have two wonderful grandchildren, and I was so lucky that I retired when they were little. And so I got to be a babysitter. And luckily for me, both Rob and Kirsten had jobs that often took them away on weekends. So grandma got to babysit. And Connor and Freya were comfortable at my condo. They loved taking the elevator. They knew all the stories and all the spots to go. And we had a great time. And those two little kids gave me so much joy. People often ask me, what are the greatest times you've experienced in your life? And once you're old and retired, you have a lot of time to think about that. And I was surprised by the things I treasured most. And one of my best memories ever is I was going to pick Connor and Freya up from the AAC craft show at XL Center in St. Paul. Kirsten had set up her booth, and I was going to pick the kids up and babysit. And they were way on the far end of XL. And so I started walking down this big hall, and all of a sudden, I see these two adorable children dressed to the nines, yelling, Grandma! And they ran to me with their arms up and just ran until they got to me and gave me a hug. And I started to cry. I was so filled with joy at that moment. I don't think I've ever been happier in my life. So that's one of my very best moments in 74 years. So now I had Rob and Kirsten and Connor and Freya, and we had fun. And I thought my family was done. But I had another surprise. I went to a Rotary Club meeting, and it's this young woman made a presentation. And she was so bright, and her presentation was wonderful. And I thought, this is really a nice woman. And Anna happened to come and sit at my table. And she was a foreign exchange student attending school in Duluth from Brazil. And she was at St. Scholastica. So she came and sat at my table, and we talked long after the meeting was over. And Anna was lonely. And so we got to be friends first. And we started having lunches together and catching up and just talking about her life. And then her mother died. Well, and she wasn't able to get home in time to say goodbye. And I was there and became good friends with Anna. Anna graduated from St. Scholastica, and we had a little ceremony at a dinner at our house with her family when they came from Brazil. Then Anna returned to Brazil, and she came back to Minnesota and asked me if I would be the mother of the bride in her wedding. And I said yes. So Rob and I went to Brazil for the wedding. I was the mother of the bride. And Rob and I had a great time exploring Iguazu Falls and all the other beautiful sites in Brazil. So since that time, I've been like Anna's adopted mother, and she calls me Ma, and she calls me every single week. And we've gone on vacations together and spent a lot of time together. So she's like another member of my family. Our family has always liked pets. And I have had a lot of animals. Our first dog was Spike, who was truly Rob's dog, who we got from Christmas. For Christmas, and Santa Claus actually delivered Spike to Rob when he was about 4 years old. And he was special because he was from the North Pole. And before that, even, I had Pekingese that I used to show when I was a single woman and married to Bob. Then, when we moved up north, we had all this acreage and lots of wolves and bear and other things that could hurt and kill little dogs. So we got big dogs, and we figured we couldn't have one, we had to have two so they could protect each other. So we got a Newfoundland and a Great Pyrenees, and we thought they'd keep each other company. That didn't turn out to be true because the Great Pyrenees wander and are solo dogs. The Newfoundlands love people and stay close to home. So they were alone and defeated the purpose of having two. So we got two more, another Newfoundland and another Great Pyrenees. So four giant dogs, and the largest one, Comet, weighed over 200 pounds. That was a lot of dogs. And then when two of them passed, we got two more, Thunder and Lightning. Thunder was another big dog and weighed over 200 pounds. And when I went back to work when he lived up north, I got a little dog to keep Greg company, and that was Hallie. And Hallie was the boss of all the big dogs and kept Greg company in the house. And then we had rodents, and so we got cats. And eventually we had four cats. So pets were a part of our life. Work was a huge part of my life. Since I never got a college degree and only managed to sneak in 2 quarters of college at the University of Minnesota, I had crappy jobs. And once I was married to Bob, I applied for what I considered a good job, and that was at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota. I went for my interview. I wore a navy blue sheath, navy blue pumps, and white and navy blue polka dot gloves. I went in and interviewed with Werner Rosenberg for the claims examiner position. I took the medical terminology and flunked. But Verna liked me, and for some reason, she hired me, even with no medical experience. So I became the claims examiner for State of Minnesota group claims. And if your name began with E through HA, you were my subscriber. And I took care of you by paying your claims, answering your questions, and mailing your checks. Now remember, this was in 1967, before computers were on the scene. So I started my job and I loved it. I had my own desk, my own phone, and my own responsibilities. And Marie was my supervisor, and she trained me, and I asked questions every single day. And I made sure that I memorized 5 CPT and 5 ICD-8 codes every single day so I could pay claims faster. And I bothered Marie with questions, so I thought she was going to be sick of me. I loved my job, and I wanted to be the best claims examiner I could possibly be. And my job as a claims examiner at Blue Cross Blue Shield started at $325 a month. Then Marie decided that she was going to get married and move, and she was going to have to be replaced as supervisor. Well, all the other people in our unit were either registered nurses, LPNs, or had been at least home health aides in nursing homes. I was the only one without any medical experience other than being a patient. And Maria called me over to her desk and said, Kathy, I recommended that you replace me as supervisor. I was gobsmacked. I was the newest claims examiner. And though I thought the rest of these people wouldn't listen to me, how could I possibly be supervisor? And I said that to Marie. And she said, well, Kathy, you pay more claims than anyone else. You make fewer mistakes than anyone else. And you're always looking for ways to improve. And I think you would be the best person to be supervisor. So I said yes. And then my career began. I got promoted from supervisor to manager and eventually was the first female vice president at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota, the youngest and the only one without a college degree. And I loved my job. I was the vice president of provider relations and health economics. I was on committees at the Minnesota Medical Association and Minnesota Hospital Association. I represented our company and we developed quality and utilization review programs to be proud of. Then in 1980, I quit my job at Blue Cross and I was done with medical politics. Long story. So I started a flower shop of all things. Everyone told me I was crazy. I had no experience. I'd never run my own business. I'd never worked in a flower shop. You're nuts. And I had saved, Greg and I had saved $10,000, and Greg supported this decision. And we started the Silver Swan on Loring Pond. Gifts and floral designs of distinction. And I loved it. And we became a success. People liked our designs. And I was going to make sure that I had exotic flowers in my store and that I would give the best customer service possible. And I hired, believe it or not, another person from Blue Cross Blue Shield who I knew was very artistic, also with no experience. And because we were both art lovers, we created different bouquets and different floral designs, and people loved it. Then we had Scott come and join us, another one with no experience. Same thing. And then just to make sure, I hired Jim and Len, both experienced floral exam designers. Well, after a year, the Silver Swan became the best floral shop in the Twin Cities area, according to the Minneapolis St. Paul magazine, for 3 years in a row. And I loved being a florist. The problem was we grew too fast and had cash flow problems, but we survived. Then someone approached me and recruited me for a job at the Foundation for Healthcare Evaluation because they had problems with politics in the medical community and they knew that I could solve them because I was respected by the doctors. And they offered me a lot of money, so I took the job. And I accomplished the goals and fixed the problem they wanted fixed. And then I was recruited by Bob Backus to come and work at United Healthcare. And I went to work as the director of claims for, at first, PHP of Minnesota, then UHC, and then all of the claims departments at all of United Healthcare's many, many health plans. Eventually, I was promoted to a senior vice president at United Healthcare. It was a real honor, but I loved my job. It was like solving a puzzle every single day. And I hired the best people. And we just continued to solve problems. And every single department we had, we left better than we had it. During my tenure, we reduced the cost of processing a claim by 52% and improved accuracy and the speed at which a claim was processed. And I will guarantee you that anyone who ever worked for me knew about time, cost, and quality measurements. Well, I was going to retire. And all of a sudden, another vice president walked into my office at UHC and said, he was the vice president of the international division, someone I didn't really have a lot of normal dealings with. And so I said, hi, Brian, come on in. And Brian said, well, Bill McGuire, the CEO of the company, and I have been talking, and we think that you would be the perfect person to be CEO of our first international venture in South Africa. And I said, what? He might as well have come in and asked me to go to the moon. And I said, did I hear you right? And he said, yes. Southern Life and Anglo American have been working with us during apartheid and wanting to get an HMO started in South Africa to reduce the costs of their health care. They have heard your presentations and are very impressed with you. And Bill and I think you're the person to be CEO. And I said, well, I'll have to think about it. And I left and I couldn't stop shaking my head. And I went home to Greg and said, Greg, how'd you like to move to South Africa? And he said, you mean to live? And I said, yes. And we made up our mind over the weekend and said we would go. And so I became the CEO of Southern Healthcare in Johannesburg, South Africa, which was a life changing experience. And I could talk to you about that for days because it was right after apartheid and the country was changing. And we hired Black people who still would not look us in the eyes as a white person. They would keep their head down and talk like this and do what they had to call shuffle talk. They had to learn to do shuffle talking apartheid during apartheid and not looking white people in the eye. And so we gave these people a chance. And oh my gosh, talk about motivation. And we paid Black and whites equally, which just wasn't done in South Africa at the time. And and Nelson Mandela had a standard that he gave for all companies in Africa that you should have the same employee makeup as the population in South Africa, meaning the same number of Blacks, same number of coloreds, and same number of whites, as they were called in South Africa. And after his first year in office, he announced that there was only one company in all of South Africa that made those goals. And guess what? It was mine. And we were so proud of that, and our people did such a good job, and it changed my life forever. Luckily, my son, Rob, was able to come and visit several times when we were in South Africa and spent quite a bit of time there. Jeremy came, and the Plums came. So we had a great time. My sister Nancy and her kids came. My sister Patricia and her kids came. So it became a family event. Then our job was done after almost 3 years, and I came back to Minnesota and I was going to retire again. And United Healthcare asked me to come and be the vice president of a new department called the Process Improvement Group. The acronym was PIG. And I said yes, but only if I could choose my own employees to be in my team. So I was able to go select some of the best employees of all UHC to become the Process Improvement Crew. And then after a year and a half, my health caught up with me and I quit again. Retired back to our home on Lake Superior. I got another call from UHC that said, we need you to come and straighten out our experience and health plan in Chicago. They are having serious legal problems with the medical community, and you're the person I think can solve it. And I said, oh, I'm retired. I'm not a United Healthcare employee anymore. You'd have to hire me as a consultant. And I gave them a ridiculous dollar amount, thinking they would never accept it. And they said yes. So I worked another year, flying back and forth from our home on Lake Superior to Chicago. And luckily, there was a straight flight to Chicago from Duluth. And that was my last corporate experience. But then, after the grandkids grew up and no longer needed grandma to babysit, I got bored. And Greg looked at me and said, if you can do anything, what would you want to do? And I said, well, I'd like to go to work part time at Fabish's, which was my favorite clothing store. And as you've noticed, I changed clothes because I love clothes and I love Fabish clothes. And so I went to Fabish's and talked to the manager, Sylvia, who's become my friend over the years. And I said, Sylvia, would you ever think of hiring me part time to work maybe 20 hours a week? And she looked at me and grabbed my arm and said, are you serious? And I said, yes, I am. And she said, just a minute. And she went back and got me an application and she said, fill this out and bring it back. So I did. I filled it out and brought it back to her and handed it to her. And without even looking at the application, she said, when can you start? So I began working part time at Fabish's in Edina. And we had our condo, so I would drive down and work 3 days and then go back home and come and work another 3 days. And then eventually worked it. So I worked 3 days at the end of the week and 3 days at the beginning of the week. So I was only had to drive down once every 2 weeks. And that worked out well. And then I got sick and had to quit. But I loved working at Fabish. It was like being part of my own soap opera. And I did love clothes and I could sell. During my career, I was also on several boards. When I worked for Blue Cross, I was on the Minnesota Medical Association Medical Services Committee with all doctors, and it was quite an honor. And then in the 70s, I was elected to be president of the Minnesota Women's Network. I was one of the highest paid women in the state of Minnesota. And there were 5 of us who were on the Minnesota Women's Network who were interviewed on television and newspapers. And I was featured on the cover of Corporate Report. And there, under my picture, the tagline said, "She has a man's mind in a woman's body." How about that, Me Too movement? Then I was on the board of the Illusion Theater and was eventually the president of the Illusion Theater Board, which puts on wonderful educational plays. I also joined an organization called First Step Initiative. This organization was founded by a woman named Chingwell Matumbo, who moved to the United States from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Chingwell would send money home in small amounts to her father, who was a minister. He would distribute it to women in the Congo who wanted to better themselves and start their own businesses. It was very successful. So Chingwell decided to broaden this organization and expand it so many people could contribute to a charity called First Step Initiative. I joined this charity on the board and eventually became president. It helped many women in the Congo, and I'm proud to have served. When my ward work was done, I volunteered, and I was a volunteer for 15 years as a home hospice volunteer. And I would visit people in hospice care like I am now and stay with them in their homes so the caregiver could leave and go get a haircut or go to church or go to the doctor, whatever they wanted to do, and know that their loved one was safe with me. I did that for 15 years and learned a lot. One of the wonderful things about being successful in my career is that it allowed us to take great family vacations. And without a doubt, these are some of the best times of my life. The first thing we did is we took the Walsteads to Disneyland, and we had a great time. Connor got to fight the real Darth Vader, and Freya got to meet the real Tinkerbell. And as we walked through Disneyland, Connor held my hand and kept squeezing it and saying, "Grandma, is this real or is this pretend?" Then, because Africa was so important to me, I wanted to make sure the grandkids and Kirsten got to see South Africa. And we went to Kruger Park and several private game reserves, and also into Zimbabwe to Victoria Falls. And we had the best time. We saw lions and elephants and zebras and so many, many, many animals, hippos, rhinos, you name it. We had fun. Although Kirsten did get a little nervous when the lion were so close to the car that you could touch them if you rolled the window down. And that was my choice for vacation. Then it was time for the kids to choose. And Connor chose Alaska. And off we went to Alaska, and we took an Alaskan cruise. And I thought, oh gosh, 2 little kids on a cruise. They loved it, and they were so well behaved and so much fun. They couldn't wait to get to dinner to see how the napkins were going to be folded. And were fascinated by how the waiters took some silverware off the plates and replaced it with others. So they learned all about entrees and appetizers and desserts and courses and silverware, in addition to catching great fish in Alaska. Then it was Freya's turn, and she remembered reading a book about a city that had streets of water. And that's where she wanted to go. She wanted to go to Venice. So off we went on another cruise. We went to Venice and 7 other countries on the Adriatic Sea and had a great time. After our cruise to the Adriatic, we went on our first death vacation. After I got my diagnosis of cancer, we thought it was going to be a very quick death. And so the Walsteads got together and we went to Niagara Falls. And I love waterfalls, and I've seen Iguazu and Victoria Falls, but never Niagara. And we had a great time. After that, our next death vacation was to Hayward, Wisconsin, where we just rented a cabin with a pontoon boat and played on the water and fished. After that, our last death vacation was to Hawaii, and we went to Kauai and the Big Island. And the kids snorkeled, and Rob and Connor took me snorkeling and held on to me so that I could snorkel even in my weakened state. And we had a great time, stayed at beautiful places, and enjoyed ourselves immensely. So family vacations have been really important. Then I love to travel. You can send me anywhere and I'll go. And we've been to over 80 countries in all 7 continents. People always ask me, what is your favorite? And that's like asking you to decide on your favorite child. It's impossible. But I did come down to my top 12. They are St. Petersburg, Russia, Meteora, Greece, Palau, Micronesia, Trabzon, Turkey, the temples and antiquities of Tibet and China, the gardens of Japan, Iguazu Falls in South America, the abundant gardens and amazing hot springs all over New Zealand, the deserts of Namibia, the glaciers and quiet of Antarctica, South Africa. There, the savanna and the animals, the Cape of Good Hope, Namaqualand, and all the beautiful flowers that grow everywhere. And number one is Italy. I fell in love with Italy. I've been to Genoa, Pisa, Siena, Pompeii, Vatican City, Cinque Terre, Verona, Genoa, Rome, Venice. Florence is my all-time favorite city. And being in Florence to me is like being in a snow globe where everywhere you look, there's art. And it's amazing. And Connor was so impressed with the art in Vatican City, he began taking notes and wrote a report on the art of Italy when we were there. So Italy is my favorite place, and it's giant. So it's cheating to say all of Italy, but I can't help it. I've never been to a place I didn't like in Italy. So that's my top 12. Last, I'd like to talk to you about my health and my spiritual beliefs, which have gotten me through my 74 years. When I was growing up, my mother used to beat me, and sometimes quite severely. In fact, when I was growing up, my Aunt Barbara told me later that she was considering calling social services because my mother hit me so much. And her sisters told her, of course, she could not turn in another sister. And my father bragged to my husband, Greg, that he never hit my mother unless she wouldn't stop hitting me. So I was an abused child. And I have to say that I hated my mother. She died without ever telling me she loved me. And she told me often I ruined her life and that I was fat, dumb, and ugly and would never amount to anything. And that was hard to grow up in that environment. So I had issues, to say the least. Plus, the main issue was when I was 17 and had my illness on the Ides of March, I had a near death experience. And during that near death experience, they didn't call it that back then, I felt my spirit rise from my body and float above me and go toward the tunnel of light. And on this journey, I looked to both sides, and there were people who were really like holograms. And I thought, oh, that's where the term ghost comes from these people. And some people I recognized as people who had passed away before, and some people I didn't recognize from this life. But I knew they were there for me. And as I traversed this tunnel and got to the end where there were people sitting, there were 2 people sitting and 2 people standing. And one of the people standing was a woman who I had seen in my dream since I was 4 years old. And she was dressed in a long blue dress with a white apron and a gold medallion around her, big gold medallion around her neck, with long silver hair, and she was beautiful. And she had come to me before in dreams. And so I figured she must be one of my spirit guides. And so I got to this table and I could tell that I was being given the choice. Do I want to stay here in the light or do I want to go back to my body? That was an interesting choice for me because I had thought very seriously of committing suicide when I was a teenager because of the beatings I used to receive and the fact that I lived in a home without love. But I asked the question, if I stay, will I have to repeat this life? And they said, yes, you will. And I said, then I'll go back. I have no idea where that question came from. And we weren't speaking words like I am now. It was all done telepathically. And so I was clinically dead. The op report says I was clinically dead for 2 minutes and 34 seconds. And I woke up with the doctor slapping my face and saying, Kathy, come back. Kathy, come back. And I did. And for the first minute I opened my eyes, everything looked different. The colors were brighter. I could see the colors of the doctor's eyes. It was like fireworks. And then within a few seconds, I was back to normal. And the next day, all I wanted to talk about was to ask people what happened to me. Where did I go? What was this experience? And everyone said, I imagined it. Nothing happened. It was just part of the anesthesia for the procedure. And just they had me see a psychiatrist. And my mother said, you shut up and don't you talk about that again. But I couldn't shut up. I had to know what happened. And so I began a search. And I started as with religion and studied all the religions and there was nothing in there that described what happened to me. And I sort of put it on the back burner for a while and my life went on. And then I heard about a spiritual conference that was in Carleton at Carleton College. It, uh, and thought, okay, I'm going to attend. So I went to the Spiritual Friendships and Fellowships Conference. It was for a week long. And you selected various spiritual teachers to attend their classes. And then they had keynote speakers every night. And I had selected Henry Rucker. I didn't know anything about any of these people. Henry Rucker was a Black minister from Chicago. And our class was downstairs in the basement in this room at Carleton College. And Henry was amazing. He had this deep voice. And quite honestly, he scared me a little. And he talked about the three parts of our body, our minds, and our spirit, and how they all three play a different part in our life. And he described about how when we die, our spirits leave our body and return to the source. And so I asked him about that. And I described my near death experience. He said, yes, that's exactly what I mean. And I said, well, the light changed, everything changed. And he said, yeah, that happens. And I said, well, I felt it again when I had my son. The light in the room changed and I felt different and the whole world changed. And he said, yep, that's a spiritual event as well as a physical and mental event. And so I was fascinated by what I learned at these spiritual conferences. And I studied with several masters, many, many masters, the best being Alberto Aguas and Henry Rucker, of course, and Dr. Serge King, Dr. Boris Bagdasarov, and many others. And I learned so much. And I applied that knowledge to my life. And this is what, after all my years of study with spiritual teachers, this is what I believe we have to do on this earth. First of all, we're here to love and be loved. That's our purpose for being on earth, nothing else. But as we go through trials and tribulations, we have to learn acceptance. It was a lot of people that's really hard. It was for me because I initially thought acceptance meant approval, and it doesn't. Acceptance means just acknowledging this happens, like acknowledging that I had a mother who didn't love me, acknowledging that I was raped, acknowledging that I had MS. It wasn't healthy and I couldn't complete my dreams or go to college or dance. And just accepting these things, because once you accept it, then you can do something about it. It doesn't mean that you approve it, but you just have to stop asking the what ifs or the if onlys or if I had just done it this way or if I hadn't been at that stop sign, whatever it is, just accept what happens and get on with your life. And that's the first step. Then comes forgiveness, forgiving my mother, forgiving my rapists. Because once you forgive, you're free. And that freedom is amazing. And then the hardest thing of all is forgiving yourself. Forgiving myself for hating my mother and not understanding that she had to live with people who didn't like her and made her life difficult. For not understanding that she married a man she never loved because she was pregnant with me. I had to forgive myself. And once I forgave myself, I felt free. Then Henry Rucker said, the very first class, you have to look in the mirror and tell yourself, I love and accept you every day, and say your name. So I love and accept you, Kathy, exactly as you are. And do that twice a day for 60 days. And I couldn't do it. I could not look in the mirror and tell myself I love me. But after I forgave myself, I thought, well, maybe there's a chance. And then finally, I got myself to do it. And it was amazing. It set me free. And after acceptance, forgiveness, and love comes peace. You're at total peace. And then gratitude. And I can honestly say, for at least the past 40 years, maybe more, I have begun and ended every single day in extreme gratitude. Grateful to be alive, grateful to see all the beauty that I've seen in my life, whether it's here in my yard or anywhere of the beautiful places I've visited on earth. And to be grateful for my family, for my husband and my son and my grandchildren and my sisters and all my relatives. To be grateful for my coworkers for contributing on the job and doing wonderful things. To be grateful to just being on this earth and see the beauty. And so it's time for me to say goodbye. I loved you all. I had a great life, and I wish you love.